This is Geometry, Lesson 1.1. In this lesson, we're going to talk about some definitions, some basic things, building blocks of geometry. You can pause as you need to write down any of these definitions. I'm just going to kind of read through them really quickly. So a point is kind of like a dot. It's a building block of geometry with no size or dimension. So you can see right here, this is a picture of a point, and I've given it a label. I've labeled it with the letter P, so the name of this point is point P. I could name a point A, B, C, kind of any letter that I want to. Our next term is line. A line is a straight, continuous collection of infinitely many points. So think of a line. We know what a line is. There can be as many points as we want on that line. It's just continuous forever in both directions, so we have arrows on both sides. When we name lines, we always use two letters, and you can pick any two letters on the line, and you can do them in any order. So I can do AB, or I can do BC, or AC, DA, DB. Those are all ways that we can name the same line right here. A plane is a flat two-dimensional surface. So the ground is a plane, the wall is a plane, a sheet of paper is a plane, any flat surface is a plane. So I just kind of have a flat surface drawn here, and I named it with the cursive letter B. So any cursive single letter would be how we'd name a plane. Our next term here is segment. A segment is a piece of a line. It's still straight, it's still continuous, but it has two endpoints. So we name segments again using two letters, and we always name them using the endpoints. So this would be called AB. You could also call it BA. The direction that we name it doesn't matter, but we always name segments with their endpoints. The next term is ray. A ray is another piece of a line, but it extends in one direction. So it has an endpoint on one end, and it has an arrow on one end. And again, you can have as many points labeled as you want on that line, on that segment, on that ray, but when we name them, we always want to use two of the letters. The endpoint has to be in the name, just like in the segment, the endpoints had to be in the name. On a ray, the one endpoint has to be in the name, so I have to have an A in the name. But then the other letter can be any letter I want, AB, AC, AD. If I added more points, it didn't matter, but the A has to be there, and then any other point on the ray. Congruent is my next word. Congruent means exactly the same shape and size. So kind of like equal. We talk about numbers having value and their values being equal, whereas shapes aren't really equal because they don't have value. They're congruent. But I have a triangle drawn here, and I have a triangle drawn here. The symbol in the middle means that they are congruent. It's like an equal sign with a squiggle on top. I've also added these marks on the triangle to show that the sides of the triangle are congruent. So this side is congruent to this side to this side, so on. My next word is bisect. Bisect means to cut into two congruent pieces. So I have an angle here that I've bisected. I've cut it into two equal pieces. I have a triangle here that I've bisected. I've cut it into two congruent pieces. A segment that I've bisected just means cut in two. My last word is midpoint. The midpoint is the middle point of a segment. So that middle point has to divide the segment into two congruent pieces. So I've added these congruent marks to show that the left side and the right side are exactly the same. A point just can't be on the segment near the middle. It has to be exactly in the middle. Moving on to the examples. The first example says to classify the figure and then name it in two different ways. So your classification means you want to say if it's a line, a ray, or a segment. Remember, lines have arrows on both ends, rays have arrows on one end, and segments would have ends with no arrows. So my first one, AB, has arrows on both ends, so I know that's a line. My second one's a ray. It has a point on one end and an arrow on one end. My last one is a segment. It has points on two ends. Naming the figure always uses two letters, even if there's more than two letters marked on the line or ray or segment. Remember, there's technically infinitely many there. So I'm going to call this one line AB or BA. I can go forwards or backwards, that doesn't matter. This ray, I'm going to call ray XZ or XY. I have to have the endpoint, I have to have the X, but the other letter can be any point on the ray. With my segment, I always name segments using endpoints, so BN or NB. Notice the symbols on tops of the names as well. The line symbol actually has arrows, the ray symbol has a one-way arrow, and the segment symbol has no arrows. Letter B says draw and label the figure. So here I have drawn ray JP. I put an endpoint of J and I put a P anywhere else on the ray. The next one says line MN, and I did it backwards on purpose because you can go forwards or backwards. You just need to have a line drawn with an M somewhere on the line and an N somewhere on the line. The last one says line AB bisecting segment PQ. Remember, bisect means cut in half. So I have my segment PQ here. I went right in the middle and marked that it was the middle with my congruent segments, and then drew line AB, making sure I had arrows to show that it was a line. My final example talks about midpoints and congruence. It says use the diagrams to answer the questions below. The first question is name each midpoint and the segment it bisects. So when I'm looking at this figure right here, I have point F right in the middle of segment CD. I know that it's right in the middle because this is marked that it's 2 centimeters and 2 centimeters. I don't know if it's the midpoint going this way, and if you look really closely, this half looks a little bit shorter, this half looks a little bit longer, so I'm not calling it the midpoint of EG. So I have F as my midpoint, and it's the midpoint of segment CD. My second figure, I see K bisecting JL. So K is the midpoint of JL. Again, I see this congruent mark here and this congruent mark here telling me that K is right in the middle of those 2 points. K is the midpoint of JL. Some people might be tempted to put H on that list as well because H is the same distance from J as it is from L, but since J through H going to L is not a segment, H is not the midpoint of that. The third figure, people might be tempted to say N is the midpoint, but actually there is no midpoint marked on this figure. Again, we need to see the number or the congruent marks on either side of that N to know that it is exactly in the middle. My final example says, name all the congruent segments, use congruent symbols to write your answers. So we have CF is 2 centimeters and FD is 2 centimeters. Since they are the same shape and size, they are congruent. Segment CF is congruent to segment FD. On the next picture, I have 2 sets of congruent markings. I have a mark here and here telling me that segment HJ is congruent to segment HL, and I have a mark here and here telling me segment JK is congruent to segment KL. And on the final image, I have no numbers, no markings, so I have no way of knowing if there is any congruence on that figure. That's it for the notes. You should be able to go on to the exercises. Please let me know if you have any questions.